Ladies, gentlemen, and Zoolanders of all ages, it's time to get mining for power. Yesterday night, we had the release of some new event quests for Monster Hunter Wilds, and one of them was the one that was delayed last week, 2 tempered 8-star Gravios, which is a hell of a hunt, honestly, and they reward you with old pickaxes that you can use at the smithy to create the 2 question mark weapons that we've had in the tree for ages, the pickaxe longsword and the sword and shield as well. These weapons are statistically identical to each other, just one of them is a sword and shield and one of them is a longsword, so I'll be talking about them both as if they are only one entity. They've got 180 attack, which as a base is quite low compared to the other rarity 8 weapons, no affinity, no element or status, but reasonable sharpness amounts, 2 3-slot sockets for weapon skills, and then a 1-slot socket too, which isn't bad by any means, and right off the bat, those stats are terrible, and if that was it, the weapon would simply go unused outside of layered weapons, honestly. But of course, these 2 weapons also share a brand new unique weapon skill called Power Stone, and this is very fun. This brings a weapon that is simply not comparable to the other options in its tier to something that can technically be best in class for a short period of time. So today let's break down the Power Stone skill in detail, the numbers behind it, and talk about if it makes the pickaxe weapons genuinely worth using. First up then, the actual in-game description. Mining particularly rare materials greatly increases attack, and then in brackets, attack increase has a maximum limit. This just opens up a ton of questions. It doesn't tell you a whole lot, it's very vague, but also very intriguing. So let's start off with the maximum effect as the easiest thing to test. Easily checked even in the training room if you want to. If you just flip the slider to active, you will get the maximum bonus from the effect, which is a whopping 90 raw attack increase. So while this is fully activated, you are using the equivalent of a 270 raw attack elementless weapon, which would then make it the strongest longsword or sword and shield in the game statistically at this moment, if, you could keep that consistently active. But as you will see, that's a lot more possible than you might think. That said, here comes the dirty work, but also the fun part. The description of the skill says that it needs to be rare materials that you mine for it to activate, but that's not at all correct. Any mined item, at least in high rank, gives you at least some level of bonus attack. The rarity of the ore that you mine decides the side of the bonus, as there are different ore types on each map, but the actual amount of attack is tied to the rarity itself. Rarity 4 ore, like earth crystals and iron ore, gives you 10 bonus raw attack for each one you collect. Rarity 5 and 6 ore, like light crystals or carbolite, is worth 15 raw attack increase. And then the big boys, the rarity 7 ore, like nova crystals and fire cell stones, are worth 30 bonus raw attack. Again, this stacks up to a maximum of 90 bonus raw, so 9 rarity 4 ores, 6 rarity 5 or 6 ores, or 3 rarity 7 ores, or of course just any mix of those to hit that maximum. The timer for the buff itself, once it activates, is 90 seconds. That is a minute and a half. So it's not all that generous, but even in a world where you can keep a 90 attack buff for 90 seconds, that's pretty solid. But the fun part is you can fiddle with this even further and extend that duration quite a bit. When you gather more ore, even at maximum attack buff, it will reset the duration of the full timer of the buff. So let's say that you get the full buff but still have an ore node left in the zone. You can fight the monster for 70 or 80 seconds with this full buff, go and hit the ore node one time before it runs out, and no matter what you will get a full timer refresh on your 90 attack buff. And again, with the 90 attack buff, this weapon is stronger than any artian or crafted weapon that we currently have. So what I'm trying to get at here is, yes, these are gimmick weapons, undeniably, but they are strangely very strong gimmick weapons. And in an absolutely perfect, ideal scripted hunt scenario, there is a very decent chance that they're actually the best in slot choice. But we have a few more things to break down before we quite reach that point. First is the Geologist skill. This skill at full 3 ranks gives you increased yield from every mining gather you do. It can turn 1 earth crystal into 2, or I've even gotten 4 iron ore from a single gather input, which is just straight up plus 40 raw attack from the skill. With full ranks of Geologist, it's actually super easy to hit the full maximum 90 raw attack buff from a singular ore node if you get just the tiniest bit lucky. Sometimes you'll even get there before the final hit. And if you have a hit left over of the node, suddenly you have the ability to instantly refresh the buff before it falls off, and then you can extend it pretty drastically. If you're in a zone that has 2 or even more ore deposits than that, you can technically just keep the skill active for as long as the monster stays there, which is exactly what you need to make this skill worth using. So Geologist makes this genuinely way better and more efficient to stack as a buff, and Geologist as a decoration is only a 1-slot armor skill, which means, especially with these new talismans that have armor slot decoration sockets in them, it's actually not hard at all to slot in 3 ranks of the Geologist skill without disturbing the rest of your existing build, which makes it just a pure damage increase when using that weapon. So that to say, when the buff is active, which is easy to maintain in any zone with more than 1 ore node, this is the strongest longsword or sword and shield that's in the game. How do we make the consideration of if that's actually worth using in your main weapon? Well, one thing that's easy to mention here is weapon swapping. For those wondering, you cannot switch weapons and keep the buff once it's activated. The buff is tied to the skill, and when you change weapons, you lose the skill, so you lose the buff. You cannot do shenaniganry with it in that way, where you get the buff while using the pickaxe, then switch and then buff a stronger weapon. But because in Wilds you have 2 weapon slots, you can just run the meta longsword or sword and shield in your primary slot, run one of the pickaxes in your secondary slot, and if one of the zones that you're fighting in happens to have ore in it, or if you are passing an ore node on your way while chasing the monster, you can swap to the pickaxe, get your really big attack buff, which makes it stronger than the meta weapons, then go into the fight and enjoy that stronger weapon, and just make sure to swap back when the buff falls off. If you run these weapons in this way, you lose absolutely nothing, especially as most people never actually utilize their second weapon slot, which means it's fully open real estate for something like this. And then you have yourself a niche situation where you can be stronger than your current meta set without ever being weaker than your current meta set. Next thing to mention then is things like lure pods. You can purposefully pull the monster to places you want to fight it in, of course, so you can always just drag the monster around to zones that have mining ore nodes in them. But that is undeniably more effort than just using standard meta stuff for a minimal gain over it. So I doubt that people will use that as a tactic, but I could totally see something like a very scripted speedrun using something like that and doing more damage faster than a non-pickaxe weapon as a result. The next fun consideration is that the skill procs if you get the ore from other sources too. Anything except for from your palico mining, because your palico can mine, but that doesn't help. If your palico does mining, it doesn't actually refresh the buff. But let's say that you're fighting a Gravios. Gravios has a 40% chance when you break one of his legs to drop a fire cell stone. He also has a 20% chance to drop a fire cell stone on any wound pop, and if this happens while you are using the mining weapons, it procs power stone for the 30 raw attack bonus, and again, this happening if you already have the buff active from another source gives you a full duration reset while you are fighting. So let's say you're fighting Gravios, you fully buff up with the Power Stone skill before walking in, you pop a wound with like 10 seconds left on your buff. If it happens to drop a Fire Cell Stone, then you get a full timer refresh, which is incredibly specific, of course, as only Gravios and specifically Gypsyros as well currently have a chance of dropping ore during their fight in Wilds, with Gypsyros dropping Nova Crystals with a 12% chance on Wound Destroy, 30% chance on the second head break. So again, those 2 specific monsters, the skill is also even better because there's a chance of just natural timer extensions by fighting them normally. That's where we're at then. This skill, these weapons, are incredibly funky. They're a bit hard to classify because if the buff being active was not enough to make it stronger than Artian weapons, they would be irrelevant. If the buff was any harder to get to max stacks than it is, or to keep active, it would be irrelevant. But because the Power Stone skill is strong enough to make the pickaxe weapons stronger than meta picks while fully activated, and because there are actually ways to make the uptime of the skill relatively high, and even further because we live in a world where you can carry a bonus weapon on your seikret and just swap between them at will, this skill is actually really good in a vacuum. If it was on a weapon with like 210 attack, it would be pretty much just a requirement to use this weapon and play around ore nodes if you wanted to do the best damage possible. But it's at that perfect tipping point of balance right now where it's good and it's worth thinking about, and if you want to be funky and play around weapon swapping, it actually has genuine meta impact implications, which is quite funny to say about these silly little pickaxe weapons, but it's also not so much of an increase that you're like shooting yourself in the foot if you don't want to deal with it. The ideal use of this by far is to just have one of these pickaxe weapons in a secondary weapon slot and tactically swap to them based on if mining nodes are around. And with that use, it should easily find a place of use with most sword and shield or longsword using hunters, which is honestly awesome to be able to say. That to say, don't throw away your current meta weapons. They're still good. They're still technically the best in the average situation. You want to keep them around. But if you can weave these new pickaxe weapons in as a secondary weapon that you swap to when they're relevant, they can be a genuine notable damage increase. And while not every zone has mining nodes, they are common enough that you can absolutely make use of this with a little bit of planning, forethought, and knowledge of the map. That does it for today then, everyone. A deep dive into the new pickaxe weapons and the Power Stone skill, and just the ridiculousness that is the fact that it's actually really relevant and useful as an endgame weapon, but with a pretty specific niche on it too. I hope you've all enjoyed this then, and I hope you enjoy living in this new mining-based world with me too. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet. Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.